Good morning, everyone. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Mayor.
Yeah. So today I have a special guest, John Colonna. He's one of the best in the field real estate attorneys.
Thank you.
And his office is close by our location in Ridgewood. He's actually in Middle Village.
Sure, right on Metropolitan Avenue.
Long time lawyer, and he's been practicing for more over than 30 years.
That's right.
And the office is located right on the Metropolitan Avenue.
Right in the heart.
Right in the heart. So, John, before we go in, maybe I'm going to give you POCA, which is preview of coming attractions.
Okay.
So we're going to talk a little bit about your practice, but more we're going to dive in maybe in the title work, commercial stuff. I know you do a lot of transactions a year, so you cover almost everything, but like in real estate, expect the unexpected.
That's right.
There's always something new that you don't expect, and always you have to deal with it. So tell me before we go in, why did you get to the real estate?
I've been practicing for over 30 years, as you say, about 35 years now. And I initially started in a different area in personal injury work.
Really?
Yeah, but...
So you were chasing
I was
the
an
bus.
ambulance chaser.
Ambulance chaser.
But after about 10 years, very adversarial type of work, very frustrating dealing with insurance companies, I sort of stumbled upon real estate and fell in love with it because I always say, just like going to a hospital, there's really no good reason to go to a hospital. And just like going to an attorney, there's no good reason to see an attorney. When you go to a hospital, usually you're hurt or sick. When you see an attorney, you're getting divorced, you've gotten arrested, you've been in an accident. But the one good reason to go to a hospital is for the birth of a baby, and I equate real estate transactions to the birth of a baby. People are usually happy on both sides. One person really wants to sell, and one person really wants to buy. And at the end of the transaction, if you've done your job right, both sides are very happy. So it's a joyous occasion that I enjoy doing.
You like to help people bring to the finish line?
I do. I do.
And I know there is like a real estate, that's the very wide range of the subjects we can talk,
Sure.
Starting from co-ops, going to multi-units, commercial.
Sure.
You also do the business, signing contracts, if somebody wants to buy the business,
Yeah.
you're looking over that as well. So your practice has a wide subject lines, right?
Yeah, when you talk about real estate, it can really vary greatly. As you say, it could be, I primarily focus on residential, but we also do commercial, mixed use, where you might have a commercial store on the ground floor and some residential apartments above, 6-family rent-stabilized apartments, warehouses. And as you mentioned, oftentimes when people have a business, let's say on the ground floor, storefront, they may also own the whole building. So I might be involved with not only helping them sell the building itself, the real estate, but the actual business that's down below. We've done that many times.
So you've been involved in many different types of transactions.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
that's
Wide-ranging.
Wide-ranging. And I've seen John, he seems very calm today, but he can turn around, he's fighting for the clients, basically.
Yeah.
He gets the deal done. This is one of the attorneys you can always reach. And I know like in a real estate world, if there is no communication between brokers and other attorneys, nothing's going to get done,
That's right. That's right. It's very important. As you say, communication is key. I give my cell phone number out to every one of my clients. It's on the bottom of my signature, my email signature. And I do that so that we can take a team approach, working with a great real estate agent like Marek. When I see a problem coming down the road.
Thank you for sharing. And I love you for caring.
It's great to have somebody like Marek also with experience where I can reach out to him and say, Marek, I can take this approach, but maybe you could do it from the back door and just do a more gentle approach rather than lawyer to lawyer bucking heads. Let's just get this done for the client, get that football across the goal line.
So usually many times people don't see that, what's really happening, in our type of world, because it's like this is above you only see what is above the surface, but what's underneath, like an iceberg,
Yeah.
And then there's a little things,
And remember, it was an iceberg that sunk the Titanic.
Yeah. No, you hit the Titanic, you hit the iceberg and you sank. So you want to make sure.
Yeah. I like to say with all those years of experience, it's not because I'm a genius. It's just that I've experienced every problem that there is, and having that kind of experience is very helpful for my clients because I can, anticipate the iceberg in the water and avoid hitting it.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. So take me maybe from like a day-to-day routine, what's the process? So for example, I have a client, I refer you as his attorney, he's going to come in, or vice versa, like on the first point of contact with the client, what do you do?
Sure. Real estate tends to be very mechanical. I sometimes equate it to an assembly line in building a car, but we do pay very close attention to the details. It starts with a great staff, which I have. We have 3 very competent paralegals. We've got computer systems in place. So when we receive, let's say, a deal sheet, which is basically a one-page summary of a new transaction from a real estate agent, and if you get a good real estate agent who provides a detailed a deal sheet with all the information that we need, we just spring into action. If we're selling, we prepare the contract based off of that deal sheet. We've got great paralegals that know how to fill out the contracts, which I, of course, review before they go out. We follow through on that to make sure that it gets signed. We always spend at least 45 minutes to an hour, whether we're representing a buyer or seller, going over that contract before they sign it. A lot of times clients are in a rush and they say, if you think it's good enough for me. But then when I take the time and I force them to go over it, they go, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, really? That's how that works? So it's very important to take that time, even though we're building this assembly line vehicle, slow down at certain points and really, really pay attention. Another important place is when a title report comes in. When you're buying and selling, the buyer always orders a title report to make sure that the person selling it actually owns it, that there's no liens, no judgments, no violations, and that's one of the most important steps. I always go through that very, very thoroughly. Then we've got a staff, again, that can address each one of those issues. I identify any potential issues, and we've got staff that addresses those issues. And if they run into problems, of course, they come back to me. And then, of course, eventually we end up sitting down at a closing about 2 months after the contract is signed. And we make sure, if we're representing the seller, that we've prepared all the papers very thoroughly so that it's a smooth transaction. We're in and out of there quickly, and everything is done right. Or if we are representing the buyer, that on the other side, whether it's the bank that's preparing the papers, that's lending the money, or the seller that's prepared the papers, that everything is done right. One little mistake can cause major problems later on. It seems routine, but it's attention to detail that matters when you're building that car. That finished product has to be perfect.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Like you build it in your car, from the beginning to the end.
That's right. When it rolls off that assembly line, you want to make sure that there's no wind whistling through the windows, or the steering wheel is on right. There's no tires that are going to fall off.
How often do you find issues with the title? For example, you have a single family and or either 2 family, they're selling as a 2 family, and the title comes in as a single family on it.
Yeah, sure.
So what do you do then?
So I would say more than 50% of the time there is a, quote, issue with title. But what people oftentimes panic about with these issues are things that I see every day. Doing over 200 of these a year, doing this for 30-plus years now. These are things that we're accustomed to dealing with. But oftentimes, as you mentioned, a deal sheet may come in and say that this is a one-family house. Doesn't happen with you because you always research that ahead of time.
We do.
But not every broker does what Marek does and gies us all the right information from the get-go. So sometimes we'll
Thank you. Yeah, John, you like a smoothing today.
Well,
it's gonna be payback.
Very often, what people think they own, they don't actually own. They may think that they've got a two-family house, and because they've been paying taxes as a two-family house, but how they pay taxes through the New York City Department of Finance is not necessarily indicative of whether or not the New York City Building Department considers that a two-family house. And that's something that I have to delve into, whether I'm representing a buyer or a seller. And oftentimes, that's one of the points that you make where we run into a problem where what we thought the house was is not what the house is. And there are different ways to deal with that. Sometimes we can, working with a good expediter, that's somebody that worked with the building department, might be able to get something called a letter in lieu where the building department will recognize it as a two-family because that's how it's been used, even though the documentation to support it just isn't there. Other times there's a price reduction because it's just impossible to prove that this is a two-family when in fact it was a one-family. So there are different things, and that's when the teamwork comes in. We go back to the broker and we ask them for their assistance and their expertise in renegotiating things. Sometimes a buyer will still buy even though it's not what they thought it was, because they've got a good broker representing, the seller has a good broker representing them, and there are other things that would make that house attractive.
Awesome. What happens if there is no certificate of occupancy on the building? Because I've seen a lot of properties were built before 1938.
Yep.
How long usually takes? What's the process? Is there a CO in place for those buildings, or how you overcome it?
Sure, sure. So as Marek points out, and he knows as an experienced real estate attorney, a real estate agent,
Thank you.
he knows as much as an attorney. Before 1938, the city of New York did not require certificates of occupancy. A certificate of occupancy, just to back up for a moment, is something that's issued when a house is built. As the name suggests, the building department will today monitor the building as it's constructed, the plumbing, the framing, whatever it might be, the electricity, and then once it's completed, issue a certificate saying that it's safe to occupy. Before 1938, the city of New York did not require that. When you go out to other locations, like in Nassau County, for example, I happen to know the village of Valley Stream started requiring them in 1925. It depends, but New York City, where we do most of our work, they started in 1938. So if you have a house, as many houses, maybe even a majority of houses in New York City were built before 1938, what do? So at that point, the tax records, the Department of Finance records do become pertinent. How it's taxed today is irrelevant. How it was taxed prior to 1938, 1937 specifically, is usually a way to prove that this house is a legal 1, 2, or 3-family house. Because if it was taxed, if it was treated in 1937, then we know that the building department today will grandfather it in or consider it a legal 2, 3, 4, whatever it might be.
And how long the process takes? Does it slows the transaction?
Not at all. Usually as part of a standard title report, title companies will always search. If they know that there is no CO, certificate of occupancy, they will search the 1937 tax records because they know we're going to ask for that anyway, and we'll look for that. Sometimes they don't. I don't know why, but that's where my job comes in, to make sure that the finishing touches are on that automobile and everything is done right.
Yeah, there is also another issue I see many times. Either the seller, they hide the information, before we put the property on the market.
Yeah.
And there was a construction done, but the permit is open.
Yep.
They don't disclose that because sometimes you go just on the basic records and you don't see that. And later on, you're receiving a title bill and there is a plumbing permit open.
Yep.
What do you do then?
Yeah, we run into that a lot on title reports. A lot of these records are readily available online. And again, a great real estate agent
Thank you, John.
like Marek will oftentimes check those records when he's representing. He takes a listing and representing a seller to anticipate those icebergs in the water. And sometimes give an attorney like me a heads up to look out for these things. But not everything is there. So that's why the title report is so important, because the title report does a deeper dive into all of these records and oftentimes discloses things that is just not readily available on the internet. So we do have to wait for that title report to come in. And, of course, the title report is part of an insurance policy where they guarantee certain things. They actually don't guarantee, and this is a misunderstanding, whether or not a house is a legal 1 or 2. A lot of people think that's part of the insurance policy. But they sort of treat it the same as if they were insuring it. So they give us information that we're really relying upon. Yeah.
Can you run it? What's usually title is? What does it secure?
Sure, we've been using this term title search. So when you buy a home, and it's probably the biggest purchase you'll ever make in your life, oftentimes $1 million purchase, it's not required by law, but it's crazy not to get title insurance. If you're getting a mortgage, the bank requires you to get it. And the title search is done usually by what's called an abstract company. Think of like an insurance agent that might sell you multiple different insurance. So you could go to, I use a company called Ultimate Abstract, and they use the biggest title companies in the country that have been around for over 100 years. First American, Stewart, all different companies. So they actually do the searching of the public records, the old paper files they'll actually search through, as well as digital records. And then they ensure that you're getting good title. They search a lot of things, not all of which are covered. They search first and foremost, who is the owner? You want to make sure that the person selling it to you actually owns it. They also search to make sure that there are no outstanding mortgages, because those mortgages aren't paid off, then it becomes a lien on your property that you're buying. Sometimes, oftentimes, there's a mortgage that will be paid off at the closing, but sometimes there are old mortgages from prior owners, and we have to get something called a satisfaction of mortgage. Sometimes there are liens, judgments, credit card bills. All of these things are insured, so you'll get a policy of insurance that covers you forever as long as you own the house. Pay for the policy once at the beginning of the process, it covers you for as long as you own the house. There are certain things that are in the title report that are not actually insured. Violations, as we mentioned, open permits, certificates of occupancy, those are not actually covered by title insurance, but they do search those for us. So we have to pay close attention to those things as well.
So later on, you can contact the broker on the buyer. There is an issue with it.
Yeah.
We need to, if you're representing the buyer,
Yep.
we need to justify it, the maybe the price, or they can take care of the permit, on it. But knowing in New York City, it takes very long time, to get the stuff done through the building department.
That's right.
And it can open up the can of worms.
Yeah.
You start digging into one thing and open up 1,000 different issues.
Yeah.
So sometimes you just close it and ask for the discount.
That's right.
On the price.
That's right. As I said before, there's no problem that we haven't seen before, and we have many, many different ways to resolve those problems. Sometimes it's by actually getting a permit closed. Other times it's by getting a credit. You give a credit to a buyer, and then the buyer takes care of it later on. Sometimes it's an escrow. We put money in escrow, and we take care of it post-closing. So we have solutions for all of this.
Yeah. How do you handle, for example, there's two people, they want to sell it at the beginning, they sign a contract, and later on, they fighting, on it. They don't want to sell it, Have you ever seen something like that?
Where somebody
in the contract
doesn't want to sell it after they've agreed to?
Yeah,
Doesn't happen often. Most times people, when they've put up a house for sale, they really do want to sell it. But I've had it happen on both ends, both as representing the buyer and the seller on that. And, it comes down to leverage sometimes. If one person promised to sell and we are representing the buyer, we can threaten to sue them for what's called specific performance. And that threat alone sometimes might foster a settlement where maybe the seller who's reneged on their promise will end up paying the buyer something. Other times they just hold fast and say no, and they play chicken with each other and see if the buyer will follow through on their threat, which sometimes they won't. But it's very rare. That's probably only happened to me. I can count on one hand how many times that's happened to me in 30 plus years.
Have you ever had to take somebody to the litigation?
Yeah, so we do try to avoid litigation. We do have attorneys that we work with closely, and we will refer things out. I prefer to concentrate on that assembly line and building the car, because if I do the litigation, and I have done it before, and from experience, it takes me away from my other clients being able to take care of their needs. As I mentioned earlier on, I did a lot of litigation early in my career in personal injury, and drafting of the summons and complaint, motion practice, all different things, even picking juries and things like that. I've done all that, but it's very, very time consuming. So it would take me away. So I try to stay in my lane, so to speak. And when we run into a problem like that, we do have people that we can refer them to that are excellent with this type of things. And oftentimes just the threat of a lawsuit fosters a settlement that both sides are happy with.
Yeah, that's a very good thing on
Yeah.
it. If you have to go, you go to that route, but
Yeah.
it doesn't happen that very often because people, they settle,
That's right,
They
that's
want
right.
to make their things easier. Another thing I see, John, in a contract, sometimes people want to have the property delivered vacant. There
Yeah.
is a tenant issue.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, that's very common right now in New York City.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it. And how do you handle that?
Sure. So as you can tell us, Marek, a property value is much higher if the building is vacant when you're talking about a multifamily home, a 2, 3, or 6-family home. The thought process, of course, being that the buyer thinks that they can always get a higher rent. I don't know how true that is, but they think they can get more rent. So they would pay a higher price for that property if one or more of the apartments are vacant. Oftentimes, a seller will come to a real estate agent and say, well, it's a 2-family house, and I told my tenant on the second floor to leave. And they're going to leave, right? But
Yeah.
they don't. So we represent in the contract that that tenant will leave on the second floor, and lo and behold, the closing date comes, and they're still there. As you know, Marek, for many, many years, I also did housing court work, landlord-tenant work.
Yeah,
where
you
we,
did a lot.
yeah, yeah. And I've still got some pending, but I'm trying to wean myself off of that because over the years I used to quote people 6 months to get a tenant out, and they used to be in shock when I said that. Then it went up to about a year because the laws in New York City have changed, and then about a year and a half. Now it's taking almost 2 years to get a tenant out.
Really?
Yeah.
From the beginning to
Yeah,
the
from
end?
beginning to end. That's the average, and it's just because they've been enacting more and more legislation to protect tenants because of the understandable housing crisis in New York City. I'm not going to deny there is a housing crisis here, but the landlords are really taking the brunt of this, and it's really wreaking havoc on buying and selling property. So I warn clients that just because you've asked them to move or even demanded that they move doesn't mean that they're going to move, and you have to go through this very lengthy process, which is not something that you want to do. So oftentimes, if you can get a buyer to purchase a home, maybe at a reduced price, and take that tenant and take care of that tenant themselves, or maybe recognize that tenant, they're going to put a tenant in there anyway, and that tenant may not be as bad as they think. And if they have a good tenant, maybe that's somebody that they should consider taking, even if the rent is a little lower than what they were hoping for.
Yeah, that's the one of the things we're dealing with a lot, and another stuff, I've seen people trying to offer money
Yeah.
to the tenant.
Yep.
Or either we're helping the tenant to relocate to the different location. I've seen that too,
Yep.
because you want to be not pressuring the tenant because everybody needs to leave,
Right.
They had the place for a while, and so you're trying to make it smooth,
Right,
for
right.
everybody, and maybe it's worth it,
Well, that's where, again, I know Marek keeps laughing at me when I say that, but a good broker comes in because those nuances are so important when you might have, let's say, a 6-family house.
Oh, 6-family, that's a different story. And also you have the Section 8 tenant, you have to
Yeah.
relocate it, you have to get a transfer package, it's...
So, oftentimes it takes a whole mix of things that you just touched upon, Marek. It might be a good tenant, and you have to convince the buyer, take this tenant because they're great. They take the garbage out. They've paid their rent on time for 20 years. They've never made any problems, any noises. Other times, this might be a problem tenant, so pay them to leave, and it might make good business sense to get rid of that tenant by paying them to leave. And that's completely legitimate and legal to do. You can't harass them, that sort of thing. So it's finding that right balance, that right mix where a great real estate agent comes into play, where they take the totality of the situation. They look at the whole building and they take an approach, maybe finding that tenant another place to move, as Marek mentioned. It's that multi-pronged approach that a good real estate agent with experience can take, and from experience can tell you how best to approach it if you're listing it with him or her.
Yeah. Thank you, John. And we just want to mention, we're not giving any legal advice. This is just public information. We're just talking
That's
general opinion. If you would like to get a legal advice, then you have to consult the lawyer, contact the lawyer, like John,
Yeah.
on it. Then he can give you opinion on it, legal stuff.
Good point.
So we've been covering a little bit right now. We touch, as you mentioned, rent stabilized buildings that we see a lot, in New York, and you do diligence. For example, if you're representing the buyer, you go in over the lease on it, make sure everything adds up on it. That's another avenue. It takes a lot of times, because New York City, you want to make sure, all leases are properly raised, escalation, it doesn't bite you later on, in the butt,
Yeah.
So-
Rent stabilized buildings are a thing unto themselves, as you said. As you know, Marek, unfortunately, because of all the rent regulations and the rules that are imposed by the city of New York upon landlords for rent-regulated apartments, the value of these buildings oftentimes are lower than what you might see in a two-family house. Even though there
you
are
see
6
the
units.
family selling for like 1.5, meantime 800,000, 900,000 for the rent stabilized building.
Yeah, and that's just because of all the hoops that the government puts people through. You mentioned due diligence. To a certain extent, we try to do what we can, but I have found, I would say 98% of buildings sellers are just not doing what they're supposed to be doing, whether it's meeting all the, what's called DHCR, the Department of Housing and Community Renewal, which is a state organization that oversees rent stabilized buildings, or the city building department regulations. Most landlords just are not meeting all of the requirements, not because they don't want to, but it's impossible to figure out what needs to be done, whether it's registering the apartment, registering the building, filing what they need to do. Some of it used to be in person, some of it's online. It's just impossible to keep up with these things. So oftentimes, I have to warn a potential buyer that you're probably going to be buying a building with potential problems, that they're, the rent escalations or increases that they've done over the years may have been calculated incorrectly. And that could be a ticking time bomb for a potential buyer. So these are the risks inherent, and that's why the price reflects these hurdles that they have to overcome.
Yeah, that's true, because you're getting cheaper price. Like probably when you started the practice at that time, rent stabilized buildings were much cheaper than regular buildings.
Yeah.
Then the area has changed through years, so they were more expensive. And suddenly, since 2019, I see the same effect, what was in 90s, on it. And many families back then, they were buying rent-stabilized building because they weren't able to afford a regular 1 or 2 family.
Yeah.
They put themselves in one of the units, and another income from renters helped them to pay the cost of mortgage, And I see that happening right now, because you can buy a very good building for like a 900,000. Meanwhile, you have to spend $2 million or 1.5 for another building.
Yeah. It's unfortunate, but there still could be great buys, as you say. You can get a 6-family for under $1 million, and if you take the time to run it right, then you can make a profit. Many people will hire outside management companies to do this. I don't do that type of work, but
We don't do that as well.
yeah.